The Last of the Firedrakes, The Avalonia Chronicles, Book 1, written by Farah Oomerbhoy, narrated by Fiona Hardingham. Chapter 1. Chance.
"Get up," said a familiar but thoroughly irritating voice. "Get up, you freak, and stop that awful shrieking." I sat up in my bed, sweat pouring from me, my heart beating so fast I had to take deep breaths to calm down. I knew it was only a dream, but it always felt so real, as if I had actually lived through it. I shielded my eyes from the soft rays of buttery sunlight that streamed in through the small white window beside my bed as I turned to see my fuming cousin, Cornelia, glaring at me. She huffed and preened at herself in the mirror, applying her favourite caramel-flavoured lip gloss and smacking her lips. Her perfect blonde curls were neatly styled and pulled back, with an emerald green headband. "It's 8 o'clock, Aurora. Get ready. We are so late. I don't want to get into trouble because of you again. We already missed the bus. Miss Holden is going to have a fit." She was already dressed for school, with her uniform and coat on. She flicked a glance toward me. "And if you are going to go on screaming like this every night, I am going to have to gag you. I just can't bear it anymore." She turned back to her perfect reflection. "Maybe you need to see a shrink," she added as an afterthought. I tried to keep my anger in check as I rolled out of bed. Okay, I'm up. "Give me 5, I muttered, and went in for a shower. Cornelia was an insufferable pain in the neck and the worst person to share a room with, but she was my cousin, so I really didn't have any choice in the matter. Maybe I did need a shrink. I couldn't control the nightmares, and I had no idea why I kept having the same dream over and over again. It only started a few months ago, on the night of my 16th birthday. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see my mother running down an obscure, shadowy corridor, carrying me in her arms. I could actually feel the heat of the flames that licked at her heels as a woman she called Morgana came rushing toward us with a gleaming dagger raised to strike. But I never knew what happened next. It always ended the same way, with a flash of light and me screaming. I couldn't remember anything about my birth parents until this dream had started. And somehow I instinctively knew that the fair-haired woman in the dream was my real mother. I was adopted when I was just over 2 years old, and was fortunate that the clothes I was wearing at the time had my name embroidered on them when my adoptive parents found me. Otherwise, I wouldn't even know what it really was. The warm shower dispelled the visions of daggers and burning corridors, and I struggled to get dressed as fast as I could. Cornelia was pacing up and down our room as I quickly pulled on my ill-fitting uniform, a moss-coloured blazer over a white shirt, tucked into a pleated tartan skirt. I adjusted the school crest on the left chest pocket. Cornelia's eyes were like ice chips as she glared at me, her arms crossed, tapping her foot. "Come on, hurry up." I wore my scruffy black shoes and rummaged through the piles of books on my desk. "Where's the rest of my homework?" Cornelia put her hands on her hips. "The crumbled sheets lying on your desk." I glared at her and nodded. Cornelia grinned, a sly look creeping into her eyes, and shrugged. "I threw them out with the trash last night after you went to sleep. Mummy said to clean the room, so I did." "But those were my notes," I ground out through clenched teeth. Cornelia dismissed me with a wave of her hand. "Well, you shouldn't leave them lying all over the place if they are so important." My fingers balled into fists, and I was moments away from punching her in the face. "They were not lying around. They were on my desk." Her eyes narrowed. "Like I said, you should have taken better care of your things." Sighing, I resigned myself to the fact that I would have to make up some plausible story about my lost homework. My history teacher was not going to be pleased, but I had long since discovered that arguing with Cornelia never got me anywhere. She always wanted the last word and would go to any lengths to make sure that she got the better of me. I glanced at the mirror. There was no point in bothering with my unruly black hair, which had now grown so long it touched my waist. Tying it in a rough ponytail would have to suffice. "My mum is supposed to drive us to school," Cornelia said as we rushed downstairs. "You know how she hates to be kept waiting." Aunt Ariana was standing in the kitchen, drumming her cherry-coloured false fingernails on the counter, looking extremely irritated. Her dark, wispy hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and her sharp, beady eyes glared daggers at me when I walked in. "Can't you ever be on time, Aurora?" Her voice had a scathing tone to it. "Tardiness is not tolerated in this house." I gave her a sulky nod. "For the life of me, I cannot figure out why my husband agreed to take you in," my aunt continued as she picked up the car keys from the counter. "If it were up to me, I would have sent you back to the slum you came from." She shot a glance at me, and her lips curved upward in a sneer. "You can take the girl out of the gutter, but you can't take the gutter out of the girl." Cornelia laughed at this and gave me a sly grin, nodding her head. I flinched at her harsh words, but chose to ignore them. That was the only way to deal with my aunt when she got like this. She was waiting for me to react, so she could find some more insults to hurl at me. It wasn't as if this were the first time she had said something like this. I was used to it in a way. I knew my aunt hated me and didn't want me staying in her house. It was my Uncle Christopher who had insisted I stay with them until I turned 18. I had tried being courteous and respectful, and I cleaned my room and helped with the chores, but she was still nasty to me whenever she got a chance. After a while, I had given up trying. So I kept my mouth shut and got into the back seat of my aunt's battered blue Volvo. She handed me a piece of toast as she got in and shot me a withering glare. "I don't want you fainting in school because you had no time to eat breakfast." I raised my eyebrows. "Thank you." She started the car. "Don't thank me. I didn't do it for you. I just don't want to be called into school to pick you up later today. I have a very busy day ahead, and I don't have any time for your silly fainting spells." My spine stiffened and I gritted my teeth. I had to keep reminding myself that I only had to stay with them for a little while longer. I couldn't wait to turn 18. Only then would I be free of the tyranny of my Aunt Ariana and Cornelia, both of whom were also probably counting the days until I left their house. Unruly tears welled in my eyes, but I brushed them away quickly. It had been 2 years since my adoptive parents died in a horrific car crash, and I had been staying with my adoptive father's brother, his wife and his daughter at their London home ever since. It was a small, comfortable townhouse in Chelsea, and I guess I was lucky that they'd agreed to be my guardians. I don't think they really needed to, since I was not actually family, just adopted. But anything was better than being put in the foster system. Although 1.5 years is not really such a long time to me at the moment, it seemed like a lifetime. School was a disaster. I had to hand in an incomplete homework assignment because of Cornelia, and I got a week of detention because of it. I knew Cornelia hated me as much as her mother did, but she was much more clever and sly about it. As the day trudged on, things steadily got worse. I failed my algebra test since I couldn't concentrate, got kicked off the volleyball team because I was late for practice, again. And to top it all off, I had no friends, so, as usual, I had to eat lunch on my own. Just a regular crappy day in my life. I was sitting in the school cafeteria, minding my own business and moving a piece of dried-up meatloaf around my plate, when a mousy girl with huge glasses, whose name I couldn't remember, came up to my empty table and handed me a note. I took it and looked up at her, my eyes narrowing. "What's this?" She looked down as she shuffled her feet, avoided my eyes, and walked away. I opened the note and glanced over it hurriedly. My heartbeat quickened. This was no ordinary note. It was from Alex Carrington, the most popular boy in school. I scanned the crowded lunchroom rapidly. Alex was sitting at a corner table, chatting animatedly with a group of his friends, all part of the football team. While I was busy admiring his high cheekbones and stylishly cut blonde hair, he looked up, and our eyes locked. He had the bluest eyes I had ever seen, and to my utter surprise, he smiled and winked at me conspiratorially. My eyes darted back to my plate, my face flushed. How embarrassing to be caught staring at him. I tried to keep a straight face while my overjoyed heart did somersaults. Could it be possible that Alex Carrington had actually noticed me? I'd had a crush on him ever since the 7th grade, but he'd never given me a second glance. Until now, I thought, with a silly smile on my face. His note said that he wanted me to go with him to Kimberly Walden's party on Friday night. He could have come over and asked me himself, since he didn't seem the note-passing type, but I could have been wrong. Maybe he was just being discreet. I wanted to get a moment alone with him. I gathered my courage and waited outside the cafeteria, preparing myself to finally talk to the boy of my dreams. He walked out of the school lunchroom, surrounded by his friends and a gaggle of giggling girls, some of whom I recognised as Cornelia's friends. "Hi, Alex," I said abruptly as he passed by me, standing awkwardly alone in the hall. He stopped and turned. "Well, hello there." His boyish charm utterly disarmed me, and I forgot what I was going to say. He put one hand on the wall beside me, his blonde hair flopping into his twinkling cerulean eyes. "So, what's up?" His voice was soft, like a caress. I got your note." I looked down and shifted from one foot to the other. This was the first time I had actually talked to him, and I desperately wanted to make a good impression, although I knew I wasn't doing a very good job of it. He raised his eyebrows, an amused smile forming on his lips. "My note?" "Yes." I figured that maybe he didn't want his friends to know about us yet, so I lowered my voice. "To go to Kimberly's party on Friday. I just wanted to tell you in person that I would love to go with you." To my utter dismay, Alex Carrington laughed at me. "Why would I go to Kimberly's party with you?" "But the note," I spluttered, fishing it out from my scruffy blue knapsack, still confused, while a growing dread started to creep into the depths of my stomach. Alex took the note from my shaky hand, stopped laughing and scanned it quickly. Finally, he looked up. "I didn't write this. I'm sorry, but I don't even know your name." My eyes narrowed as I started to come to terms with what was happening. "Then why did you wink at me during lunch?" A cold smile curled his lips, revealing his pristine white teeth. "I wink at all the girls, honey, especially those that look at me the way you were staring at me in the cafeteria." "Oh!" My face heated, and I fumbled with my backpack as my hands shook harder. Alex raised his eyebrows, a knowing look in his eyes. Confidence born from the knowledge that every girl in school was dying to go out with him. "I thought everyone knew I was going with Cornelia to the party." Suddenly, raucous laughter erupted behind me. Someone had played a cruel joke, and it didn't take a genius to figure out who it was. Cornelia and her friends were laughing their heads off at my utter humiliation. I turned and fled down the school corridor, disappearing into the girls' bathroom, the dissipating sounds of Cornelia's evil laughter ringing in my ears. I was never a popular girl in school, but now my already wobbly confidence was crushed beneath Cornelia's perfectly manicured feet. I would be the school joke, the person everybody whispered about behind their back. After an hour of crying and feeling sorry for myself, I finally managed to dry my tears and wash my face. I looked in the mirror. My skin was blotchy, and my usually bright green eyes were dull and bloodshot. I had to pull myself together so I could get to my next class. I dragged myself out of the bathroom and managed to slip into my English class. I sat at the back where I would not attract undue attention and tried to listen as Mr. Roberts warbled on about the significance of Shakespeare's As You Like It, but my mind was elsewhere. I knew my grades had slipped drastically, and I was working on it, but there were some days when I still could not function properly. I would lie in my bed for hours thinking about my adoptive parents. They may not have been my birth parents, but they'd cared for me as if I were their real daughter. My mind was filled with memories that I held on to like a lifeline. Picnics in the park, holidays by the sea, people who actually loved me. And then I would realize that it was gone, that I was all alone and nobody wanted me. And I would cry into my pillow at night, muffling my sobs so that Cornelia would not hear me. I had long ago given up wondering about my birth parents, who they were and why they gave me up. No one ever had any answers, and soon I stopped asking altogether. But now this recurring dream had begun, and I didn't know if it was a real memory or just a figment of my imagination. I tried not to think about it, but the mysterious woman in a crimson cloak who held a dagger to my mother's heart seemed all too real. I shivered at the thought and clutched the medallion that I wore around my neck, turning it around between my fingers. Besides the clothes on my back, it was all I'd had with me when I was adopted. Shaped like an antique gold coin, the carvings on it were in a script that I did not recognize. But it was my only link to my birth parents, and I never took it off. It was my lucky charm, and although it wasn't much, having it with me made me feel safe. "Aurora Darlington," came the crisp voice of Miss Holden, the headmistress of my school, jarring me out of my reverie. I looked up. I hadn't even noticed her come into the classroom. What had I done now? I wasn't exactly the best student these days. I knew that. But I had made it a point to scrape through just enough to stay out of my headmistress's way. Until now. Miss Holden glared at me. "Aurora, I'd like to see you in my office." She nodded perfunctorily at the bespectacled Mr. Roberts, who looked utterly terrified of her as she walked out of the room. I gathered my books and bag and got up from my desk. A few girls sniggered behind me, but I was used to it. Ever since my parents died, everyone spoke to me in hushed voices, as if I might crack any minute, or they talked and whispered about me behind my back. I had learned to ignore it and move on. But after what happened today, I knew exactly what they were laughing about. I hung my head and hurried out of the classroom. Headmistress Holden's office was much smaller than I had expected. I closed the door behind me and turned to stare at the long and angular face of my uncle, Christopher Darlington. He wore his usual grey pinstripe suit and dabbed his sweaty forehead with a crumpled handkerchief, which he dug out of his pocket. What was he doing here? Cornelia's face flashed before my eyes. I really hoped I wasn't in trouble for something I had not done. Again. I wouldn't put it past her to frame me for one of her mistakes. She had done it to me before. My uncle looked at me with dark, brooding eyes hidden behind horn-rimmed glasses as he pushed his sandy hair out of his eyes. "Good afternoon, Aurora." I nodded. Christopher didn't hate me like my aunt and cousin. Most of the time he treated me like I wasn't even there. He wasn't nasty to me, but he never stood up for me either. We barely said 2 words to each other, and I only saw him at dinner time. He worked at a bank, I was told, and was usually out of the house before I woke up. Miss Holden cleared her throat before she began. "Aurora, my dear." Her voice was so different from her usual rude, clipped tone that I was momentarily taken aback. She always had a sour look on her face, as though she had eaten a whole bowl of lemons. I had never even seen a flicker of a smile on her face, and now she was grinning away like her life depended on it. "Your uncle has requested for you to take a leave of absence from school." "Right now?" I blurted out. No one had said anything about this. Her eyes narrowed, and she gave me a stern look, her lips a thin line. "Let me finish. Your grades have been steadily slipping, and you have barely passed most of your classes this year." "But," I interrupted. Miss Holden held up her hand. "Nevertheless, I have decided to grant you leave this time, since your uncle has explained the circumstances." I frowned. "Which are—" Miss Holden clasped her hands in front of her. "I am sure your uncle will explain it to you." I shot my uncle a questioning look, but he remained silent. I wasn't too disappointed. After all, missing so many days of school would be great, and that meant I would be away from all the pointing and whispering. which had been happening constantly since the whole school heard about my incident with Alex Carrington. Christopher stood up and shook Miss Holden's hand. "Thank you. You have been most helpful. I will have her back in a few days." He walked across the room and opened the door. "Come on, Aurora. We have a busy day ahead." I remained silent, gathered my things, and followed my uncle out of the headmistress's gloomy office. I had no idea what was going on, but I was sure I'd find out soon enough.
Chapter 2. Redstone Manor.
As soon as we got home, I packed my meagre belongings in an old duffel bag that Aunt Ariana had brought down for me from the attic. It was splitting at the seams and the handle was torn, but somehow I managed to lug it down the stairs and out onto the street. My uncle had explained that we were all going on a trip. He and the family had been invited to his boss's country house for a few days, and Uncle Christopher insisted that we leave immediately. This was why I was pulled out of school. What was so important that it couldn't wait until the holidays? The last time they went away, Aunt Ariana left me with Mrs. Havisham, who lived across the street. She had 2 uncontrollable little children, and in a way of payment for my room and food, I had to babysit the little devils. It wasn't that I didn't like children, but 7-year-old twin boys were a bit more than I could handle. A big black Range Rover was parked outside the house. Uncle Christopher was sitting in the front passenger seat, and a chauffeur in a hat got out and opened the door for me to get in. I handed the chauffeur my luggage and got into the roomy back seat, where Aunt Ariana and Cornelia were waiting. We drove at a leisurely pace due to the traffic while leaving the city, but within half an hour I could see Windsor Castle rising up in the distance above the treetops, and soon we were in the countryside. Uncle Christopher had mentioned it was going to be a long journey, so I closed my eyes and decided to nap. When I woke up with a crick in my neck, it had become chilly, and there was a nip in the air. I gazed out at the trees whizzing past and shivered a little as I pulled my favourite coffee-coloured leather jacket closer around me. The spring evening was gloomy as dusk settled over the hills in the distance, turning the sky to a dark burnished orange. Bright green meadows and lush woods whizzed past as we drove, but I had no idea which part of the country we were in. "Another few minutes and you'll be able to see the house," said Uncle Christopher, sitting up straighter in his seat. I peered out the back seat window. A light mist rolled around our car as if searching for a way to get in. No house in sight. Not that you could see much with twilight setting in. We must have been travelling for hours, and I was exhausted. Cornelia didn't even bother to look up. She huffed and continued texting away on her new rose gold iPhone. When the house finally came into view, I had to admit that Uncle Christopher was right to get so excited. The house, as he called it, was not just a house. It was a massive, centuries-old structure called Redstone Manor. As we drove through the gargantuan iron gates and up the grand sweeping driveway lined with old spruces and ancient oak trees, Uncle Christopher chattered on in his irritating nasal voice. "Redstone Manor was built over 300 years ago, and it has been in my boss's family ever since." He puffed out his chest, as if he had something to do with it. The manor house was an enormous structure, made up of high walls and towering turrets. It looked more like a miniature castle than a house. Emerald green ivy and flowering creepers of dusky rose climbed the red stone walls, and massive arched windows embellished with decorative panelling lined the sprawling house. It was absolutely enchanting. "Welcome to Redstone Manor," said my uncle. As we drove up to the massive front porch, supported by great stone pillars, I was more than excited. I had never been inside a real English manor house before, and I was looking forward to exploring the property. A thin, stern-looking lady with spectacles and a severe white bun stood at the top of the steps to greet us. She introduced herself as the housekeeper, Mrs. Crowley. Standing to her right was a portly man, smartly dressed with his shoes polished to perfection. He was Mr. Maudsley, the butler.
"Welcome to Redstone Manor, Mr. Darlington."
Yes, glad to be here, said Christopher, puffing out his chest again. He was obviously feeling very important right about now. He cleared his throat.
"When will I be able to meet Lord Black?" "His lordship was delayed. He will meet with you tomorrow when he returns," said Mr. Maudsley.
"Follow me and I will show you to your rooms." Mrs. Crowley's tone was crisp, and she reminded me a little of Miss Holden. "The footman will take your luggage. I will have some food sent up. You must be tired from your long journey." My uncle and aunt nodded and beamed as if they were being shown into Buckingham Palace as we followed the housekeeper up the broad stone steps and into the massive house. The great arched oak doors opened into a massive foyer with a grand staircase that led to the upper floors. An ornate crystal chandelier glittered from the high-beamed ceiling, lighting up the polished walnut floors. Beautifully carved statues and huge paintings lined the walls of the mahogany-panelled corridors, and I gaped at my surroundings as I tried to take it all in. I fiddled with my medallion and followed Mrs. Crowley. I couldn't understand what we were doing here. The butler referred to the owner of this house as his lordship. Was he an earl? A duke? The housekeeper showed us to our rooms and left me to unpack and freshen up. Cornelia and I had a whole suite of rooms, 2 bedrooms and a large, comfortable living room beautifully decorated with wallpaper of dusky pink blossoms curling over a pale cream background. The vast arched windows were ornamented with scalloped curtains in a sumptuous forest green and lined with burnished gold tassels. I wandered around the room and sat on the edge of my bed. I wished, for the 1000th time, that my life were different, that somehow my adoptive parents hadn't died in the car crash. I even wondered occasionally what my life would have been like if my birth parents hadn't given me up. But it was no use wondering. It was not going to bring anybody back. I had already decided that I was going to make the most of this place, and I wasn't going to let my cousin's presence spoil my experience here. I liked history, and being in a house this old made me very curious to explore its secrets. There was a tray laid out in the living room with dainty cucumber sandwiches and small savoury puff pastries. I popped a few in my mouth and went in for a relaxing bath. Even though I was exhausted from travelling most of the day, I wouldn't be able to sleep without reading for a while. I was quite sure that a house of this size must have a library where I could look for a good book. After I had my bath and changed into my pyjamas, I put on my pink fleece dressing gown and resolved to look for it. I walked quickly down the long corridors of the massive manor, occasionally passing white-capped maids in uniform, shuffling busily out of rooms, arms laden with linens or clothes. After many dead ends and locked doors, I finally stopped one of the maids and asked for directions. I was pointed toward another, darker wing of the house. It was eerie in the east wing, and cobwebs hung in the corners of the shadowy corridors. I tried a few doors and found myself in various stuffy rooms with white dust covers that obscured the furniture. This part of the house looked like it hadn't been lived in for a long time, and the rooms smelled musty and unused. I had nearly given up my search when I noticed a big oak door at the far end of the corridor. Moonlight streamed in through the windows, illuminating the corridor ahead with a spectral white sheen. I pushed the heavy door open slightly and peered inside. Finally, the library! Now if only I could find a good book. The beautiful oak-lined library was a remarkable space. It was the only room in this part of the house that looked like it was cleaned every day and pristinely kept. A first-floor gallery ran along one side of the gigantic room, adorned by an intricately crafted, church-like ceiling. 2 large leather armchairs were placed on opposite sides of a small round mahogany reading table, and the gleaming walnut floor was covered with plush Persian rugs. Along one wall, 2 immense bay windows, both hosting a cushion-covered window seat, overlooked the vast manicured gardens of Redstone Manor. Perfect for reading. As I walked farther into the massive library, my eyes were drawn to the wall at the very end of the room, and I was immediately mesmerized. The entire wall at the far end was swallowed up by a huge tapestry, which dominated the whole space. It was a delicate and elaborate weave depicting a lush but dark forest surrounding a crystal-clear lake with a medieval castle glistening in the distance. This was definitely my favourite room in the house. I turned back to the bookshelves. Redstone Manor had an excellent collection. I was at a loss as to where to start. The walls of the enormous room were packed from top to bottom with shelves filled with a seemingly countless array of books. Some were newly bought, and some looked as though they must have come with the house many centuries ago. This seemed like a dream come true. Just as I found the complete Chronicles of Narnia, I heard someone at the door. I don't know what came over me, but I panicked and dove behind one of the large leather armchairs. My heartbeat quickened as I peered out from behind my hiding place, feeling immensely stupid. I tensed. It was Uncle Christopher. What was he doing here at this time of night? Looking for a book seemed like the only reasonable explanation. I was about to come out from behind the chair and announce myself when I realised that he wasn't going toward the books, but toward the tapestry. What was he up to? Christopher stopped abruptly in front of the tapestry and stared at it. I stayed where I was because I had no idea what he was doing, and I didn't want to startle him. I looked over at the door of the library. It was shut, and there was no way I could leave the room without Uncle Christopher noticing. So I crouched and waited. My uncle was definitely acting very oddly. That became eminently clear when he held out his arms, palms facing outward, and touched the tapestry. I felt a breeze whisk through the room. I turned to the windows, but they were shut. A rustling noise startled me, and I looked back at my uncle. My mouth fell open as I stared mutely at the scene unfolding in front of my eyes. The tapestry on the wall shimmered like moonlight on water, while the rustling noise and the breeze came from inside it. I spotted the bushes in the tapestry moving slightly, and suddenly strange ripples started forming in the fabric, expanding from the middle like when you throw a pebble in a pond. A chill scuttled down my spine as I watched a big, booted leg and an arm come through the tapestry. Slowly, finally, a whole body emerged. I had to clap my hand over my mouth to prevent myself from gasping aloud. A big, rough-looking man in a fur-lined black cloak with a patch over one eye and a massive sword that swung at his rather large waist stepped out of the tapestry and into the library of Redstone Manor. Everything happened so quickly I couldn't even think. I knew I should say something and excuse myself, but then my uncle might think I was spying on him. In fact, I was much too fascinated to do anything more than crouch behind the large leather armchair and see what happened next. Finally, the stranger spoke, his voice a deep rumble.
"Christopher, do you have the girl?"
Numerous scars crisscrossed his thickly bearded face. For a moment I wondered what had happened to him to disfigure him so. But then my thoughts whirled quickly back to the main questions clamouring in my head. How on earth did he appear out of the tapestry? What was on the other side? Who was this man? And what girl were they talking about? Christopher bowed slightly to the black-cloaked man.
"Yes, Lord O'Bleck."
O'Bleck levelled a hard look at my uncle, his one good eye widening in expectation.
"Is she here? In the house?"
"Yes, I have brought her to Redstone Manor as you requested." Christopher quickly stepped back.
"Are you sure she's the right one?"
Why did he look so nervous? I couldn't understand who or what they were talking about, but I started to get a really bad feeling that I wasn't going to like it.
"Yes, of course, I'm sure."
O'Bleck's condescending tone was harsh.
"Would I have wasted years of my life searching for her, only to find the wrong girl?"
My uncle shook his head and dabbed his perspiring head with a purple handkerchief.
Why are you so interested in Aurora anyway?
My blood ran cold as fear coiled inside me. They were talking about me. What did this horrific man want with me? This made no sense. Oblek shot him a dark glare.
I have my reasons.
He clasped his hands together.
Finally, I will deliver the girl to the Queen, and she will reward me beyond all imagination. Yes, you can do what you like with her, Christopher said impatiently, but not before you pay me my fee. It has become quite considerable now, seeing as I will have to answer many questions about her when she's gone.
Dread pulled in the pit of my stomach. Gone? Where was I going? Oblek's eyes narrowed.
You'll get your money, but only after I have the girl in my possession. When is the earliest you can get her to me? Ariana will bring her down here at midnight,
my uncle confirmed. I wasn't surprised to learn that Aunt Ariana was involved in this. She'd wanted to get rid of me ever since I moved in with her, but I thought Uncle Christopher liked me. I couldn't believe how wrong I was. There was absolutely no one I could trust. Suddenly my foot cramped. I gasped, clutched at it, and started rubbing, but I had to change my position. I moved ever so slowly, adjusting myself behind the armchair, but it was a futile attempt. My shuffling had created a noise. Oblek whirled around, his hand on the hilt of his massive sword.
Someone's here.
I moved backward, but there was nowhere to go. I was trapped. Christopher rushed over in the blink of an eye, grabbed me by the arm, and pulled me up from my crouching position. Don't you know that it's bad manners to eavesdrop, young lady? His floppy gold hair was a mess. He was fuming, and his glasses were steaming up.
What have we here?
Lord Oblek fixed his one beady black eye on me with a scrutinizing glare as he came toward me.
It's the girl you have been searching for, my lord, said Christopher with a thin smile on his reddened face.
He pulled me along toward Oblek, clutching my arm with his bony fingers, which bit into my skin like needles. You're hurting me! I tried to pull my arm free from his grasp, but he didn't let go. Oblek crossed his arms across his chest.
So, it seems your work has been done for you, Christopher. She has been delivered to us on her own accord.
I gritted my teeth. I'm not a package to be delivered anywhere. You have the wrong girl. I don't even know you. Oblek smiled.
Ah, I know you. Aurora Firedrake.
What nonsense. That's not even my name. I'm Aurora Darlington, I insisted. I told you, you have the wrong girl. Oblek ignored me and spoke to my uncle.
She has a strong likeness to her father, the same dark hair and green eyes of the Firedrakes. She is definitely the one. I don't know how she managed to stay hidden all these years, but she is Azarin and Elena's only child. I am sure of it.
My mind reeled with the implications of this revelation. I longed to know who my real parents were, and this person seemed to know them, however dangerous he looked. Let go of my arm, I growled at my uncle, trying to twist out of his vice-like grip. He just laughed at me and held on tighter. I had to do something. I had to get away from him. I punched my uncle in the stomach and he released me, momentarily stunned as he bent over. I took my chance and made a dash for the door, but Christopher recovered quickly, caught me again, and slapped me across my face. My head whipped to one side with the force of the blow. My cheek stung as I cupped my hand over it. My uncle dragged me back to Oblek, who stood watching all this with an impassive expression on his face.
Interesting.
Oblek came closer and stared me down.
A feisty little thing, isn't she? I must get her to the Queen immediately. There is no time to waste.
What Queen? What the hell was this guy going on about? And where did he want to take me? He stepped closer to me and I instinctively shrank away. His breath was rancid and his rotting teeth grinned at me through the mess of his black beard. You're not taking her anywhere until you get me my money, Christopher announced, holding on to me like a lottery ticket. He stared, edging away from Oblek toward the door, pulling me along with him. I want what I was promised. And you can't take me anywhere I don't want to go, I added for good measure. Not that it was any help. A wicked grin spread across Oblek's hideous, scarred face.
Oh, you'll get what you deserve, Darlington.
Faster than I could follow, he raised his right hand and white bolts of light shot out from his palm, hitting Christopher squarely in the chest. My uncle's grip on my arm loosened immediately, and he crumpled to the floor like an empty sack. Oblek closed the space between us in a trice and grabbed my arm.
And you, my dear, don't have a choice.
I stared at the crumpled form of my uncle on the floor. He looked dead. You killed him? I gasped, still frozen in shock.
It doesn't matter. I don't need him anymore,
said Oblek, not giving Uncle Christopher another look. All this was happening too fast. I couldn't understand what this had to do with me. I wanted to find out more about my real parents, but I didn't want to go anywhere with this strange man. Who knew what he was planning to do to me? I'm not coming with you, I tried to pull away from him. You're a monster! But he held my arm in an even tighter grip than my uncle had, and laughed.
You haven't seen anything yet, my girl. Where you're going, monsters will be the least of your problems.
A chill snaked down my spine. Where was he taking me? What do you mean? My voice cracked and my legs felt shaky.
You will find out soon enough,
he sneered, pulling me to the tapestry that rippled as soon as he touched it with his palm. I felt like my life had shattered all over again. My parents were gone. My uncle had sold me like a slave, and there was no one to help me, no one on my side. I was alone. I was in trouble, and I had absolutely no idea what to do. I tried to be strong, to figure out how to get out of this situation. But it was all too much. I couldn't help it. I went numb and stopped struggling just as Oblek yanked my arm and pulled me into the magical, shimmering tapestry.
Chapter 3. Kidnapped. For a second that felt like a lifetime, everything stopped. I felt like I was floating in nothingness. Then I blinked, and when I finally opened my eyes and focused again, I found myself standing at the mouth of a small cave situated on a hill, overlooking a tranquil, moonlit valley. On my left, a dark forest stretched out as far as the eye could see, treetops glistening silver in the light of the full moon. The hills around us undulated into wildflower-filled meadows that lay sleeping in the dewy night. Far down in the valley, I could see a little village, its lights twinkling in the distance. To my right, a sparkling waterfall splashed into a small river that ran down into a lake, next to which the little village was built. The moon here was fuller and more vibrant than I had ever seen it, and the stars overhead glittered like jewels in the night sky. I looked around for the tapestry, but it was gone. Where was I? I was still trying to get my bearings after that strange moment when I had been both inside the tapestry and nowhere at the same time. It was a peculiar feeling, as though I had been lifted out of my own consciousness and then put back into my body. A warm breeze brushed past my face and played with my hair. Gone were the cloudy grey mist and the cold, nipping wind of the English countryside. I drew in a sharp breath of crisp, fresh air perfumed by the sweet scent of strawberry bushes and fragrant wildflowers. How did we come here? Where are we? Oblek gave me a sidelong glance, and his eye narrowed.
You really are an ignorant one, he snapped. I take it your uncle didn't tell you anything about who you really are, or where you are from.
I shook my head and glanced down. Oblek had tied my hands with a rope he had with him, while I was still dazed and looking around. It was humiliating, and the rough ropes cut into my wrists, rubbing them raw every time he pulled me forward. I had to find some way out of this. and at the moment, the only thing I could do was discover more about where I was. When I got an opportunity, I could escape and find my way back up to the cave on the hill, where we had arrived out of the tapestry. But then what? Christopher was probably dead, and Aunt Ariana would doubtless blame me for everything since I had disappeared at the same time. I didn't really want to go back, and now that my adoptive parents were dead, I had nothing to return to. I had no idea what to do. A slither of dread raced down my spine. I had nowhere to go, and my mind conjured an array of horrible outcomes of my kidnapping. My palms had become sweaty, and my racing heart thundered in my chest as I half walked and half ran, desperately trying to keep up with Oblek's giant strides. I levelled him a hard look as I tried to reason with him. "You do know that this is called kidnapping?" But Oblek was silent. He didn't even look at me. He kept walking ahead and dragging me along behind him, without any explanation as to what he was planning to do with me. I had no idea if I was going to survive this, but I tried to pull myself together. "Where are you taking me?"
Queen Morgana will decide what is to be done with you, said Oblek, finally speaking.
Queen Morgana? The woman from my dream? Fear gripped me and embedded itself deep within. It was not possible that this, too, was a coincidence. It must be the same Morgana, the one who had tried to kill my real mother. Who the hell was she, and what did she want with me? It was becoming painfully obvious that I really had travelled through a magical tapestry into some strange world. It all seemed very exciting in books, but being kidnapped and then hauled around like an animal, travelling deep into a land I knew nothing about, was not my idea of fun. I wanted to find out more about what he knew of my parents, but I was getting tired as I trudged along behind him. My legs ached and my fluffy slippers were wet and dirty. I wondered how much longer we would have to walk. "Where are you taking me?" I tried again. Oblek unexpectedly turned toward me to say something. I realised that was my chance, and I took it. I kicked his shin, yanked the rope out of his hands, and tried to make my escape. He hardly felt it. He quickly caught the end of the rope that he had tied around my hands and pulled on it hard, spinning me around. I fell forward onto my hands, pain shooting through my knees. Oblek sneered at me lying in the mud and held out his huge, beefy right hand, curling his fingers as if he were catching something in the air in front of him. I felt an invisible hand grab my throat. I choked and gagged as Oblek slowly cut off my air supply while I clawed at the invisible fingers, trying to wrench myself free. It was no use. He used his magic again. The invisible hand pulled me to my feet, lifting me up by my throat. I tried to scream, but only choking sounds escaped my parched lips. I felt dizzy as I gasped for air, and the world swam before my eyes. I was sure I was about to die. After moments that felt like hours, he loosened his invisible grip on my neck. I landed on my knees, and with a flick of his hand, Oblek pushed me. I stumbled onto my back and clutched at my neck as I gasped for air.
That was only a warning, you foolish girl. The next time you try to escape, you will not be so lucky. The Queen may want you alive, but she never specified your condition. I am quite sure she will not mind if you are missing a few body parts.
My hand shook, but I had no choice as he started pulling on the rope. I had to get up or risk being dragged along behind him all the way. I tried to calm my galloping heart and concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other. After an eternity of walking, I had already fallen countless times and my hands and knees were bleeding. Aching all over, I struggled to keep up. I followed Oblek down the hill and into the valley. I could see well enough because of the full moon, but the shrubs and bushes snagged and tore at my clothes as he led me along a muddy path that skirted the edge of the woods. "Please, can't you at least tell me where we're going?" He shot one dark eye toward me.
Tonight we will stop at my castle, and at daybreak tomorrow we will ride for Nerina. The Queen will be eager to see you.
Will we be riding horses? I asked, understanding slowly dawning.
Yes, of course. He looked momentarily bewildered. Why would you ask such a stupid question? Oh, yes, in your world you have... what do you call them? He snapped his fingers, as if trying to remember. Those funny carriages you call cars to get around. He yanked the rope and pulled me along again. Never really liked your world, and I seldom go there. That's why I get people like your uncle to do my work for me.
I glared at him as the bitter realities of this world started seeping into my sleep-deprived brain. There were no cars here, probably no electricity or running water, and it was ruled by a queen who sounded like a tyrant. How would I survive here, even if I did manage to get away from a black? We walked the rest of the way in silence, my brain in overdrive. I was exhausted and had abandoned my wet, muddy slippers somewhere along the way. My feet were cut all over and bleeding, but Oblek didn't care. He pulled me along like a dog on a leash. It was still dark when we finally reached his castle. The moon had decided to hide itself, and the shadows followed us like bloodhounds looking for their next kill. High stone walls surrounded the main tower, and a dirty, moss-covered moat encircled the castle on all sides. The keep was flat, squat, and covered in blackened vines and creepers. A thick, gnarled forest stretched out behind it, and numerous guards were posted on the battlements. It was nothing like Redstone Manor or even the surrounding countryside I had seen when I came into this world through the tapestry. This castle looked bleak and sinister, like a charred, ash-covered rock amidst a green, flowering valley. Lightning crackled overhead, lighting up the eerie grey structure with a sinister glow. I shuddered as he led me closer to it, not sure what to expect now. I wiped my face with my sleeve as best I could. My feet burned, and I wished for a warm bed and some food, but both seemed quite unlikely. A big wooden drawbridge swung down in front of us. The guards, recognizing Lord Oblek, had signalled the gatekeeper to lower the bridge. We entered a walled courtyard, and I stumbled to a stop behind Oblek. A big stone fountain of a goat-like creature spouting water dominated the cobblestone enclosure. Looking up, I could see people peering out of the windows that surrounded the courtyard. I wondered if there was anyone there I could ask for help, but I doubted it.
"Guards!" commanded Oblek, without looking at me. "Take her to the dungeons. No one is to speak to this prisoner, or it will cost them their heads. Is that understood?" The guards nodded and scurried to catch hold of my arms, one on each side. There was no use struggling, even if I did get free. Where could I go? "All the cells are full, my lord," said one scrawny guard with long, matted black hair, whose filthy hand was wrapped around my arm. A cold smile curled Oblek's lips. "Just put her in the pit. The prisoners down there are to be executed at dawn, so anything she says will go with them to their grave." The guards took me down the grey stone corridors and dark steps that led under the castle. They shoved and pushed me the whole way, even though I wasn't resisting. It was damp and sinister down in the dungeons, where the air reeked of rotting food and other things that I didn't even want to know about. I could hear moans and strange screeching noises coming from some of the cells as we walked past them. I tried to ignore the sounds as the guards unlocked another door, which led still deeper underground. As I passed one of the iron-barred cells, a thin, wrinkled hand shot out from between the bars and grabbed me. Shooting pain lanced through my arm as the hand clutched at me, digging long, dirty black fingernails into my skin. I was horrified as I stared down at my arm and tried to wrench myself free. A shriek of laughter forced me to look up. The weathered hand belonged to a gnarled, white-haired woman. Her face was brown and wrinkled like old leather, and her eyes were completely white.
"Finally, she has come!" she screeched. "Shut up, old woman!"
the guard snapped, leaning over and prying her fingers off me. Stunned and shaken, I was dragged off to my own cell. The old woman didn't stop. She went on screaming, "She has come, and she will destroy you all." Shrieks of cackling laughter followed me as I was led deeper down into the pit, the lowest and most horrific part of the dungeons. Obviously, the old woman was mad. She couldn't even see me, but still, I was shaking. The guards looked at me suspiciously as they shoved me roughly into a cold, dark cell. They left, their booted feet thumping on the stone floor. I heard the wooden dungeon door creak and slam shut. Even the cackling laughter of the old woman dissipated. Then, silence. Chapter 4. The Black Wolf. I looked around, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. Moonlight streamed in through a small, barred window, which was high up on one wall of the dungeon cell. I heard some scuffling, and my heartbeat sped up. "Who's there?" A young boy who looked about my age stepped out from the shadows. He was tall and lanky with blonde hair that was more silver than gold, and that reached past his shoulders. "Good eve to you, my lady." I glanced behind him. Another dark-haired person stood motionless, leaning against a wall and hidden in shadows. I couldn't see his face clearly. "We mean you no harm," said the fair-haired boy. "I am Carlen, and the surly one over there is my friend Finn. Don't worry about him. He's just upset about being caught." He stopped to take a breath, and before I could say anything, he started talking again. "Not to say that I am not upset too, but Mother always says there is no use worrying about something you have no control over. What is going to happen will happen. There is nothing you can do about it." Finn stepped out from the shadows. "Do you have to be so cheerful all the time, Carlen? We are in Oblek's dungeon. You know no one gets out of here alive." Carlen scowled at his friend. "You just can't be optimistic, can you?" "I would," Finn retorted, "if there was something to be optimistic about." I got up from my corner, slowly moving closer to Carlen. Finn shot me a dark look and stepped back into the shadows. I instinctively liked Carlen. He spoke extremely quickly, but he seemed like a sincere person, saying whatever came into his head. I looked closely at him when the moon shone through the window. Carlen's eyes had changed colour, from violet to silver and back, while he was talking to me, and I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but I could swear that his ears were slightly pointed. I shook my head. Maybe I was so tired I was hallucinating. I lowered my voice. "Who are you?" Carlen grinned. "Never seen one of the Fae before, have you?" "Fae?" Carlen nodded. "I have heard in the northern kingdoms they sometimes refer to us as fairies." My eyes grew wide. Fairies? Was he serious? He didn't look like any fairy I had read about. I knew it wasn't possible. Fairies didn't exist. But I thought magical worlds didn't exist either, and look how wrong I'd turned out to be. Why had Oblek locked them up in the dungeons? He had even mentioned that they were to be executed at dawn. Were they dangerous? Carlen furrowed his brows in confusion. "You don't seem to be from around these parts." I shook my head. What could I say? That until tonight I never knew this strange land existed? I had no idea who to trust, but if Oblek wanted them dead, then at least I knew they were not on Morgana's side. I glanced at Finn from the corner of my eye. "So, you're both fairies?" "Yes, but we do prefer to be called Fae." Carlen stuck out his puny chest. "Where are you from?" He continued, but obviously became tired of waiting for an answer and proceeded to answer his own question. "Probably from Andresia or Kaliandria." His eyes widened. "Or maybe you are a tribal princess captured from Roron? Although I thought the people from Roron had darker skin." I nodded, intentionally silent. I wished I had a map of this world. "Do you live nearby?" I tried to move the conversation away from myself. "Yes, and we are some of the last few left in Iliador. Most of the Fae live in Elfie now." "Elfie?" I repeated after him, sounding very silly even to myself. Carlen lifted his eyebrows. Surely you have heard of the land of Elfie, the kingdom of the Fae that lies to the south. Oh, that, Elfie, I said, trying to cover my lack of knowledge. Yes, of course I know Elfie, kingdom of the Fae. I was talking quickly, too quickly, and Finn was looking at me with an unfriendly glare. Carlen was oblivious to his friend's mistrust of me and continued with his story. Ever since Morgana became queen, our kind have been tortured, brutalised and killed. We've been run out of our homes, had our festivals banned, and had our homes burned. Some say that Morgana is trying to run all the Fae out of Iliador, since so many have left these lands and gone back to our homeland. Our village in the Gold Leaf Forest is the last one left. Finn stepped forward. That's enough, Carlen. You can't tell her everything. She may be one of them. Who knows why they have put her in here? Carlen's eyes narrowed and briefly turned silver. Are you a mage? My eyes widened. What was a mage? I knew it had something to do with having magic, but I wasn't sure. Oblek seemed to have some sort of magic. I had seen him use it on my uncle, and I had felt it when he tried to choke the life out of me. I am not a mage, I said quickly, trying to cover up my dumbfounded look. I just need to get away from Lord Oblek, or he is going to take me to Queen Morgana. I hope that using their hatred for Morgana would spur them to help me. Carlen's eyes grew wide. Why? What did you do? I didn't want to say too much, not that I knew much to begin with. I still wasn't sure whom I could trust here, but these Fae definitely seemed like a safer bet than Oblek. I didn't do anything. It's because of my family. Finn turned to glare at me, arching a brow. So, who is your family? Oblek would not have abducted just any girl. He must be planning to ransom you, not kill you. Wait for your family to pay him, and you will be able to go home. We, on the other hand, are to be executed. At dawn. There was an edge to his voice. No, you don't understand, I said, wringing my hands together. He said very clearly that he will take me to Morgana in the morning. Please, there must be a way out of this place. Finn glared at me. No one leaves Oblek's dungeons alive. There is no way out. Don't scare her, Finn. Carlen immediately snapped to my defence, moving in front of me as if to shield me from Finn. I couldn't understand what I had done to make Finn dislike me, but I was more concerned with how we were going to get out of the dungeon. I turned to Carlen. Don't you want to find a way out? You said yourself that you are to be executed at dawn. Don't any of you have magic? I thought all Fae, would have magic. Carlen looked at me intently. It's a little more complicated than that. Not all Fae have the same sort of magic, and we are still young, babies really, in the Fae world. Our magic may not emerge for many years to come. I hung my head. We had no plan and no weapons, and Carlen and Finn didn't look like they were strong enough to fight the guards. We were doomed. I sat down on the cold stone floor, hugging my legs. I clasped my medallion in my palm for comfort, irritated at myself for being so utterly useless. Carlen came up and patted me on my back awkwardly. Please, my lady, don't lose hope. I am sorry we can't help you, but we are in the same predicament. Our best chance now is to pray to the goddess Dana. Only she can help us now. I nodded and tried to keep myself from panicking. There had to be another way out of here. Suddenly, there was a scraping noise at the dungeon door. I looked up. Carlen put his fingers to his lips. Shh! I held my breath. Terror welled up inside my chest. Had they come for me, or were they going to take one of the others? My hands had gone clammy, and I clutched them together to stop them from shaking. We waited as the grating noise went on. After what seemed like hours, but was really only a few seconds, the thick and battered wooden door to the cell opened slowly. A young man stepped inside, his black cloak billowing, the hood over his head. He removed his cowl and turned toward me just as a shaft of moonlight streamed in through the tiny barred window, illuminating the stranger. He wore a black mask over his glittering eyes, and his dark, untidy hair fell in soft waves that framed his finely chiseled features, strong jaw and high cheekbones. But his grey eyes looked like storm clouds as he scanned the room in one quick sweep. Who was he? He didn't look like one of Oblec's men.
Well, well, if it isn't the infamous Black Wolf, said Finn in a whispered sneer, coming out of the shadows. Come to save the day again, have you? And how do you propose to do that this time? Oblek has doubled the guard, and there is a price on your head. Morgana's men have been given instructions to kill you on sight.
The mysterious stranger just turned and gave Finn a charming smile. He didn't look perturbed in the least. He was over 6 feet tall, lean, muscular, and dressed in a loose white shirt worn over fitted brown leather trousers. A dark leather belt around his waist had a whole arsenal of weapons tucked into it, including a sleek sword and a small knife. I also noticed another knife strapped to his thigh and an additional pair tucked into his high brown boots. He seemed well equipped for anything. Of that I was quite sure.
"Rafe, you came," said Carlen softly.
Rafe nodded as he shut the heavy wooden door quietly. Did you doubt that I would?
"Finn said you didn't have time to come get a useless pair of fae like us, and that you were going to let us be executed. But I told him that I knew you would find a way to get us out," he added with a smug glance at Finn.
Rafe looked Finn straight in the eyes. Ah, yes, Finn. Quite the pessimist, isn't he? Finn, quite surprisingly, appeared embarrassed and kept quiet. Rafe turned to Carlen. Well, we're not out of danger yet.
"You shouldn't have come, Rafe." Carlen lowered his voice. "Your life is in enough danger as it is. We could have escaped on our own, you know."
Rafe smiled and patted Carlen on the back. You know I would never let down my friends, Carlen, no matter the dangers, and I don't think your mother would have ever forgiven me if I let anything happen to you. Carlen beamed at Rafe. I looked at Finn, who was glaring at Rafe. I couldn't understand why he wasn't happy that someone had come to help us. And who is this? Rafe asked Carlen, suddenly seeming to notice I was there. He glanced over at me with an amused expression on his face. I stood up, smoothed my hair and tucked stray strands behind my ears. I must have looked a sight. "Another prisoner, brought in today," answered Carlen quickly, and he proceeded to give Rafe a quick summary of who I was and why I was here. "So you see," he said to Rafe, "if we don't take her with us, she will surely die." Carlen was being quite dramatic, but I thought it worked. Rafe looked me over, obviously weighing the options of whether to help me or not. "She comes with us," he said flatly, after a moment of hesitation. Finn didn't argue as we followed Rafe out of the dungeon. We moved quietly and swiftly in a line up the stairs. "Who are you?" I asked my rescuer. Rafe glanced back for a moment, a smile curling at the edge of his lips. "A friend." He had a deep voice with a very charming accent. Whoever he was, I was intrigued, to say the least. Somehow he had managed to get the lower dungeon door open and stepped out first. "Wait here." I heard a scuffle, and sooner than expected, Rafe was back. "All clear," he said with a shrug of his powerful shoulders. He seemed very confident, as though it were a hobby of his to break in and out of castles. We gingerly stepped over 2 dazed guards, and Rafe took us through a narrow stone tunnel, which was a different path than the one where I had entered the dungeons. The shadowy recesses of the stone tunnel were dark and eerie. The occasional drip of water was the only sound, besides our shuffling feet. Rafe's hand lit up, illuminating the tunnel with a soft glow. He seemed to be one of the mages Carlen had talked about. I was fascinated to see real magic at work once again, as long as it wasn't directed at me. I moved closer, the warmth from the ball of light a beacon to the others as we traversed the darkness of the underground passageway. The tunnel opened into a small, shadowy alcove in the main castle. The corridors were deserted at this time of night, and we ran as quietly as we could through the dark passages. Rafe seemed to know exactly where he was going, and the others followed him without question. As we entered the courtyard, we had to keep to the shadows, crouching at times and flattening ourselves against the dark stone walls as we moved. "How did you get into the castle?" I asked Rafe. He gave me a faint smile. "It wasn't difficult. Oblek's guards are not very well trained. The eastern gate is poorly guarded, and half of them are drunk or passed out at this time of night. The hour before dawn is the best time for an escape." "Or a robbery," I added, glancing at him from the corner of my eye. I guessed he was some sort of thief or outlaw from the way Finn spoke earlier. He seemed to find that funny and chuckled. True. How do I know if I can trust you? After all, I knew absolutely nothing about him, except that he was a wanted man. Rafe stopped abruptly and turned toward me. I don't think you really have a choice right now, my lady. His tone was clipped. I held his gaze. He was right. I didn't have a choice. He was my escape route, and I had to trust him, for now, at least. I shook my head. Fine. Now what? We go to the stables. Rafe signalled Carlen and Finn to follow. I glanced back. Finn was still scowling, but he didn't dare question Rafe. There were 3 guards in the stables. They drew their weapons when they saw us, rushing at Rafe with their swords raised. Rafe raised his right hand and shot 2 bolts of white light from his palm. Both guards crumpled to the ground, just as Christopher had when Oblek's bolt had struck him. The 3rd guard tried to shout for assistance, but when he opened his mouth, nothing came out. Rafe had done something with his magic, rendering the guard unable to speak. Frustrated, the guard rushed toward us, his sword raised. Rafe already had his sword in his hand. He blocked a blow to the head from the remaining guard and pushed him backward, slicing him cleanly on his leg, then hit him in the face with the hilt of his sword. The guard went down as fast as the other 2. He turned to me, his stormy eyes gleaming with the thrill of a fight. We should leave now. It will be dawn soon. I nodded. Was he for real? Carlen grinned. Whatever you say, Rafe. Get the horses, Rafe ordered in the tone of voice of someone used to being obeyed without question. We untied and led 3 horses quietly out of the stable. I followed Rafe, my heart still pounding. I hoped that I wasn't making a mistake, trusting him. But he was my only option, even though he could just as easily betray me to Morgana. Carlen, we will regroup at the meeting place, Rafe said quietly, so Finn couldn't hear. The 2 Fae mounted up. You, he then said to me, and held out his hand. I faltered. Come with me, he urged. One of the guards spotted us and started shouting, The prisoners are escaping! Before I could respond, Rafe jumped up onto the horse in one fluid stroke, clasped my hand in his, and swung me up behind him. I grabbed onto his waist for dear life as he gathered up the reins and rode out of the stable. Dawn was upon us. The gates had been opened to let traders and farmers into the castle, and shouts of, Close the gates! Close the gates! Rang in my ears as our 3 horses galloped across the courtyard toward the drawbridge. Guards clamoured to grab the creaking iron chains and started to slowly pull up the drawbridge. My heart hammered in my chest. Everything was happening so fast, I barely had time to breathe, let alone think. Rafe let Finn and Carlen's horses go first, and veered our horse around to face the guards. He held out his hand and shot jets of white light like before, buying us the seconds we needed. It's the Black Wolf! Shouted one guard. Get him! Shouted another. The Queen is offering a fortune for his head! A frenzy of chattering broke out as the word spread. More guards hastened to help their comrades. Carlen and Finn raced toward the gates amidst the chaos, clearing the drawbridge and galloped ahead out of harm's way. A few of Oblek's guards had pulled themselves together and started shooting arrows at us. Rafe raised his hand, and I could feel magic pulsating around us as the arrows stopped inches from our faces, falling to the ground. We raced for the drawbridge as an arrow whizzed past my head. If we were caught now, they would definitely kill us. What if an arrow hit our horse? What if an arrow hit me? Various scenarios started playing out in my head, all of them ending in a gruesome death. My hands shook, but I clung to Rafe, determined not to fall off the horse. Our mount galloped furiously toward the drawbridge, which was now at an angle, chains creaking as guards desperately tried to raise it. The drawbridge formed a steep slope, and Rafe spurred the horse even faster. The horse slipped once, and I nearly fell off. I screamed, but we still thundered on. I closed my eyes and prayed. Finally, I felt the horse jump, and my heart jumped with it. I could hear arrows whizzing past my head and the guards shouting. I felt a jarring impact as we hit the ground, but miraculously remained on the horse. When I finally opened my eyes, I realized that we had cleared the moat and were heading toward the forest, that lay in wait behind Obleck's dark castle. Chapter 5. Avalonia. The dark forest looked menacing as we raced toward it. The sun had just started to rise above the trees, illuminating the tops of the towering oaks. The guards tried to chase us, but we had a considerable lead, and Rafe was a magnificent horseman. So we managed to shake them off. We lost them as soon as we entered the gnarled forest. For some reason, they didn't seem to want to follow us there. I had no idea where Carlen or Finn were. We had split up, and I was all alone with Rafe. Rafe slowed the chestnut horse deftly to a walk. "Are you all right?" I nodded. "I think so." He craned his neck to look back at me and smiled. I wished he would take off the silly mask that hid the rest of his face from me. The forest seemed different once we were safely within its boundaries. From the outside it looked like a dark and shadowy place, but from the inside it was bright and cheerful, with sunlit groves, beautiful, tall cedars and oaks, and sparkling waterfalls that plunged effortlessly into shimmering ponds. Birds happily chirped their morning tunes, and the wildflowers were fragrant and bright. Dewdrops clung to the vibrant emerald foliage, sparkling like fairy dust in the light of first dawn. Rafe seemed to know where he was going as we rode along a small, winding path through the trees. My main concern right now was to figure out what to do next, and I was still trying to decide whether I should trust him. Morgana's guards were also looking for him, so being with Rafe was probably not the safest place for me right now. Rafe broke the silence first. "It's been an interesting morning, my lady. I don't mean to be rude, but where will you go now?" "I'm not really sure," I said truthfully. I couldn't decide what I should tell him. "If Obleck intended to hold you for ransom, he will come after you. Are you going to tell me who you really are?" He ran a hand through his dark, tousled hair. "Or am I supposed to guess?" I hung my head. I had to tell someone where I was really from. He seemed resourceful. Maybe he would know what to do. Or maybe he knew who my real parents were. I decided to take a chance. I was at a complete loss in this world, and I needed help. "My name is Aurora," I said finally, and proceeded to tell him everything that had happened to me since I arrived at Redstone Manor. I told him about my uncle and how he sold me to Obleck, about the strange tapestry, and even what he said about my parents and me. I didn't tell him about the dreams, though. Somehow I felt it was too private to mention. But it did feel good to finally have someone to talk to about all this. Rafe stopped the horse, jumped down quickly, and turned to glare at me. His eyes narrowed. "I do understand that you have gone through a lot, my lady, but I don't think you need to resort to lies about who you are." I bristled. "I'm not lying." Rafe raised an eyebrow. "If you don't want to tell me who you really are, that's fine. But a word of advice. If you are going to use another name, you should find one that not everyone in the kingdom knows." He held his arms up to me to help me off the horse. I swatted his hands away and jumped off the saddle. "I can dismount myself." "As you wish." He turned and tied the horse to a nearby tree and scanned our surroundings once before he came back to me. "If you don't believe me, I can't force you," I said, trying to make him understand. "But there must be someone who can tell if I'm really Aurora Firedrakes." Rafe nodded solemnly. "Yes, there is. But I should warn you. You are better off just telling the truth." I threw my hands in the air. "I am telling the truth." "That remains to be seen." His gaze softened. "Come," he said, holding out his hand. I took it cautiously. Could I really trust him? I didn't know him at all. But now that I had told him my story, I wanted to hear what he had to say. He didn't seem to think that it was possible that I was really this world's Aurora Firedrakes. Could Obleck have been wrong? Did he kidnap me because I looked like her? Rafe led me through the forest, down a slightly worn path deeper into the trees. I tried to keep up. My legs and back ached from the vigorous ride. And I was quite sure that tomorrow I wouldn't even be able to sit down on my terribly sore backside. My hands and feet were cut and bleeding, and I was a complete mess. We came to a little clearing where the morning sun danced and played on the surface of a pond. Wildflowers grew in patches near the water, and Rafe sat me down on a large, moss-covered stone overlooking the gleaming pool. I dipped my cut and bleeding feet in the cool water and sighed as it immediately relieved the stinging pain. I washed my hands and bruised face, feeling a little better. Rafe sat on a similar rock near me, took off his mask and ran his fingers through his dark, wavy hair. I didn't want to stare, so I pretended to wash my feet and peeked at him from under my eyelashes. I knew he was handsome even with the mask on, but without it he looked younger than I imagined. He seemed not that much older than myself, maybe 3 or 4 years. He smiled at me, and I shifted uncomfortably on the rock. Somehow he made me feel like he knew exactly what I was thinking. I flushed, straightening. "Even if you don't believe me, you do know why this queen wants to see me." Rafe nodded. "If you really are Aurora Firedrake, Morgana will stop at nothing to get to you." My eyes widened. "Why?" "Shh." He put his finger to his lips. I immediately shut up and looked around. I could see nothing, but I could hear a faint rustling in the bushes, and I turned toward it. Rafe already had his sword out and moved slowly in front of me. After a few moments of frantic rustling, the foliage in front of us parted, and a dishevelled Carlen appeared in the clearing. "There you are!" He brushed off the leaves from his shirt, completely oblivious to the fact that Rafe had nearly run him through with sharp steel. "I don't know why you made this the meeting place. It's nearly impossible to find." Rafe's lips turned up in amusement as he put away his sword. "That's the whole point, Carlen." My fae friend came and sat down next to me. "Have you figured out a way for you to get back to wherever your home is, my lady?" I shook my head. "No, not exactly." I shot a glance at Rafe, who was now leaning against a tree with his arms crossed in front of him, watching me. "So, are you going to help me or not?" "Carlen," said Rafe, "can you keep a secret? We are going to need your help." Carlen nodded his head vigorously. "Of course I can." Rafe rolled his eyes, but he quickly related my story to Carlen, whose eyes went wide at the mention of the name Firedrake. He listened quietly, which seemed like a first for him. "Do you think it's even possible?" Carlen asked, incredulously. "Aurora Firedrake died years ago." "I don't know," said Rafe, rubbing his chin. "But Silverthorn will be able to tell us for sure. If she really is who she says she is, then she isn't safe here in Iliador. We must get her over the border to Eldoran immediately." Dread slithered down my spine. "Why won't I be safe here?" "Because if Morgana or Lucian find you, they will kill you," said Rafe plainly. I stood up abruptly. "Kill me? Why would they want to kill me? I don't even know them. And who is Lucian, anyway?" Carlen's eyes went wide. "You don't know who Lucian is?" "Obviously not," I said, irritated at Carlen's disbelief. I was the one who had found out that some crazy queen I'd never met wanted to kill me. I should be the one asking the questions. "Lucian is the archmage of Iliador, and Queen Morgana's right-hand man." Carlen's voice held a tinge of awe. "The what? Did he just say archmage?" "The archmage," repeated Carlen. Rafe laughed as he pushed himself away from the tree on which he was leaning. "I think she heard you the first time, Carlen." Carlen furrowed his brow in confusion. "If you truly do not know anything about our world, I will try to explain as best I can." Rafe settled himself beside me. "Morgana calls herself Queen of Iliador, although she is nothing but a deceitful usurper." "Whose kingdom did she usurp?" His grey eyes gleamed intensely and his lips turned up in a half-smile. "Well, if you are telling the truth, yours." I held his gaze. Surely he couldn't have meant what I thought he said. "Your father was the king of Iliador, and you were heir to the throne," Rafe continued. "But just before your 2nd birthday, Morgana took her chance. She betrayed your father, Azarin, and with the help of Lucian, she killed your family and took the throne of Iliador." "How could she do that? Why would she?" My mind flashed back to the recurring dream of the woman called Morgana with the gleaming dagger in her hand. "She was your father's half-sister," said Rafe, a trace of disgust in his voice. "He trusted her." "His sister?" His jaw tightened. "Half-sister. Rafe specified. I was appalled. I looked at him wide-eyed, and a wave of panic rushed over me. If what Rafe said was true, and this Morgana was the same one from my dream, then I was in serious trouble. I don't want to be heir to anything. Why doesn't she just leave me alone? I'm not a threat to her. Just knowing you're alive is a threat to Morgana, Rafe said, his lips a thin line. That is why Oblek has been searching for you. She will not rest until all of Azarin's bloodline has been removed. You are the only obstacle to her complete right to the throne of Iliador. My shoulders drooped. He had said that my parents were dead. For so many years I had hoped that my birth parents would come and find me, that they would regret giving me up, and when no one ever came to claim me, I was convinced that they had abandoned me. Now it looked like both my parents were gone forever, and I was completely alone. I frowned and lifted my chin. This wasn't the easiest situation, but I would just have to find a way to deal with it. Do you know how I escaped? Rafe shook his head. I have no idea, but I know this. Whatever saved you that day was extremely powerful magic. Did my parents have magic? I ventured. Of course, said Carlan. All the nobility are from magical stock. It has always been like that since the kings of old, since Aurora Firedrake walked the world and was High King over all the known lands. Despite the situation, I felt a thrill course through me. Does this mean I also have magic? Rafe's eyes narrowed. Not everyone is born with the gift of magic. Sometimes it skips a generation or a sibling, and even those who have the gift may never truly learn to master it. We will have to wait and see if you have the potential. That was not the answer I was looking for, but it was a start. I flashed him a glare. So you believe me now? He shrugged his broad shoulders and stood up. It's possible that you could be telling the truth, but only one person can tell us for sure. Who? The Duke of Silverthorn, your grand uncle. We left the little clearing, and Rafe led us deep into the forest on foot along a small, winding path. He had put on his mask again, and his black cloak rippled around him as he moved surely and effortlessly through the trees as if he knew this forest like the back of his hand. Where are we going? Tonight you will stay with Carlen's mother in their village. She is a gifted healer and will tend to your wounds. Rafe glanced at my feet. I have some important errands I have to take care of. Tomorrow I will return and take you to Duke Silverthorn. Dried leaves crunched beneath my feet as I walked beside him. Do you know him well? Rafe's brow furrowed. Who? Oh, Silverthorn. There was a hint of a smile on his lips. Yes, I know him well. He's your father's uncle, and if you are truly Azarin's daughter, then he will be the only one who can confirm it. My spine stiffened, and I stood up straighter. I don't mean to sound ungrateful. I shot him a quick glance. Rafe's mouth quirked to one side. By all means, be my guest. Carlen sniggered beside me, but had the sense to keep silent when I glared at him. Don't get me wrong, but if you still don't believe me, then why are you helping me? Rafe's sharp eyes softened. He sighed and ran a hand through his dark hair. There was a time when I knew your father. He was an exceptional mage and king, one who genuinely cared for the common people, and they loved and revered him for it. He was also a fearless warrior, and his courage was the stuff of legends. I smiled at this. My father sounded like a wonderful man, and I wish that I could have met him even once. But that still doesn't answer my question. Rafe's eyes narrowed, and he threw me a pointed look. Once, when I was barely 5 years old and living in Neris, your father was on an official visit to the city. I was standing in the crowd, but I was too close to the cliffs. I slipped and hit my head on a rock and fell into the sea. Azarin saw me fall and jumped in after me. If it weren't for him, I would now be resting in a watery grave. He paused, and the look in his eyes held a dash of sadness. If you really are his daughter, I can repay my debt to him by helping you. I nodded. Fair enough. I was grateful for Rafe's assistance, and his story explained why he wanted to help me. Maybe I could trust him, but he could just as easily be making this up. I was apprehensive about meeting the Duke. What if this was all a mistake? What if I were the wrong girl? where would I go then? I had nothing left in the world I grew up in, except disappointment and heartache. It was going to be harder here, I could tell, but at least I had family. Real family. I wanted to meet my granduncle. I wanted to learn about my real parents, and for once in my life I wanted to know who I really was. "You will be safe here in Pixie Bush," said Carlene, breaking my anxious reverie. "And my mother can find you some suitable clothes to wear." I looked down. In all the confusion, I hadn't realised that I was still wearing floral pyjamas and a pink woolen dressing gown, and I was walking around barefoot. I blushed furiously. I had forgotten that I had changed into my nightclothes before I had gone looking for the library in Redstone Manor. It was just last night, but so much had happened since then. Rafe seemed to find my embarrassment funny and was chuckling to himself as he turned to me. "This is where I will take my leave, Aurora." "Thank you for all your help. I really appreciate it." What more could I say? Rafe's full lips curved in a dashing smile. "It was a pleasure." He bowed briefly. "Until tomorrow, my lady." He turned and disappeared into the trees. I looked back at Carlene. Now where? I was famished and exhausted. I hadn't slept the whole night, and I was eager to change and eat something. I hoped Carlene's home was not too far from where we were, because I was too tired to walk much farther. Carlene beamed. "Now we go home to Pixie Bush."